Hello and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today is Tuesday, May 13th. Hey, at least it's not Monday anymore. I got a good show for you today, though. Gonna go over Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, those SEC teams that were kind of on the bubble of the playoff last year. Gonna talk about them. Could they be in the playoff this year? Did they make enough moves to get them over that last little hump? Gonna dive into that. Also, gonna discuss Indiana, Illinois, two programs that have kind of been mentioned with each other, kind of on the same tier in terms of Big Ten contenders, competition. So we're gonna discuss them. Who would be more likely to make the playoff this year? Gonna dive into that. Then we're gonna do some ACC power rankings. Gonna start those today. We're going to start from the bottom, work our way up. We're going to go about 17 to 12 this round here, so we're going to do that. Then we are going to talk some Clemson football. Is Clemson back fully? We're going to dive into it. Make sure you stick around for my last segment when we go back to the Big Ten. Finish up our Big Ten quarterback rankings 4 through 1. The top guys, the cream of the crop there. We're going to get into that later on in the show. Before we dive into anything, though, I just want to remind everybody, this show is all about you. We love hearing your comments, questions, insights, opinions, anything you want. We want to make the show as interactive, as exciting as possible. One easy way to do that is to use the Super Chat feature. To use that feature, all you have to do, click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box, type in your comment, question, message there, and send that in. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, gets read live. It's also just a great way to support our show, support our channel, support what we're trying to do here at the GSMC Podcast Network. Now, let's talk some SEC bubble teams in Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. 3 teams that were right on the cusp in 2024, just barely missed out on the playoff. And they could have been in. There was an argument for at least one of those teams to make the playoff, but obviously did not make it last year. We're going to discuss them in depth, see did they make enough moves this offseason. I want to talk about Alabama first. Alabama, first year under head coach Kalen DeBoer, had a tough year for their standards, right? That's important to note. Alabama's standards are much different than the rest of college football. Still had 9 wins, went 9-3 in the regular season, and then had that really disappointing ReliaQuest Bowl in which they lost to a barely above 500 Michigan team. Really kind of put a damper on the end of that season there for Alabama. They couldn't overtake SMU for that last final playoff spot in last year's rankings. They were the first team out last year, and they did kind of regress last season. Let's be clear with that. Saban's last year compared to this past season in 2024, there was a clear decline in Alabama's play. But I could definitely see them coming back up on the upswing. And there's a couple reasons why. They last year, there were a lot of issues where Alabama's defense, they kind of had some problems. Second half against Georgia, that game, they really just gave up everything, essentially. And then that upset loss to Vanderbilt in Nashville, which one of the great upsets in SEC play in a long time. Vanderbilt finally getting a signature win, coming at the expense of the Tide, though. So Alabama did lose Jihad Campbell, Malachi Moore, but they did add a lot of depth up on the defensive front, as well as in the secondary, right? Through the portal, they got guys, Kelby Collins, Florida, Nikhai Hill-Green, Colorado, both linebackers. They should kind of help take over and maybe fill that hole that Jihad Campbell left there in the middle of that defense. They also brought in Cam Calhoun, cornerback from Utah, to hopefully kind of bolster that position group. And then you look at their offense last year. The offense faltered at multiple points in the season. So at times it was their defense, and at times it was their offense. More so than not, it was the Tide offense that really kind of held them back last year. Most obviously was in that 24-3 loss against Oklahoma. Really a surprising result, considering how much Oklahoma struggled last year in SEC play. They were able to dominate Alabama throughout that entire game. Alabama just couldn't get anything going on offense. And then, the loss to Tennessee, the loss to Michigan, the offense obviously really looked rough there. But there's hope for improvement here. They did finish 22nd in yards per play last year and in scoring offense, which I was a little surprised by, but they were super inconsistent, right, throughout the entire season. Jalen Milroe, exciting quarterback, but the highs were highs and the lows were really ugly lows. They're looking for a little more consistency this year. They're hoping that backup from last year, Ty Simpson, can step into that role and give them a little more consistency from the quarterback position. I think that's something that we're definitely going to see from Alabama this upcoming year. Also, don't discount Ryan Grubb coming back into the fold in the Kalen DeBoer coaching staff. Ryan Grubb, a guy that has been with DeBoer throughout pretty much most of his college stops, obviously was his offensive coordinator at Washington, especially that year they went to the national championship. That was Ryan Grubb's offense. That was his kind of scheme. And they did have some great weapons that year. Michael Penix at quarterback, some of the wide receivers they had there on that team. That was a really stacked Washington offense, but the scheme also really helped them. And I think Ryan Grubb getting back into the fold, coming back as his offensive coordinator after a year where he was the offensive coordinator at the NFL level with the Seahawks, coming back, having that year of pro experience, kind of taking a step back last year in terms of college landscape, should kind of help him to refocus, re-gear towards this Alabama offense. So you have Ty Simpson coming in to replace Jalen Milroe. You also bring in Miami transfer Isaiah Horton to kind of help round out that wide receiver room. Isaiah Horton, 56 catches last year, 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, consistent threat for Miami. You add him to a room that has veteran Jeremy Bernard, as well as, that stud sophomore Ryan Williams. Kid's awesome. I think he's going to be one of the top wideouts in the country. And Ryan Williams is going to be another big reason that Alabama, if they do make it this year, I think a lot of that will be because of his play from that wide receiver position. He showed it last year in flashes, right? Georgia had that really key touchdown at the end of the game. And then just a couple other times throughout the season, you saw just the talent level of Ryan Williams. I'm hoping for a little more consistency this year. Also, name to watch out for, Jalen Mbakwe, former 5-star athlete, a guy that was super highly ranked in his class, kind of switched back and forth between wide receiver and cornerback. Sounds like he might play wide receiver again this year. If you pair him with Isaiah Horton and Ryan Williams, that's a dynamic receiver room. Really going to help out Ty Simpson there. They also added 3 transfers at tight end. They were really low on bodies in the tight end room. And 2 along the offensive line, headlined by Texas A&M transfer Cam Dewberry. He should kind of help solidify that O-line. You still have Caden Proctor coming back at that left tackle position, anchoring the blind side. This is a team that they still have the talent level. They are clearly one of the top teams in the country in terms of talent. I am really big on Kalen DeBoer as well. I would not be surprised to see Alabama back in the college football playoff. I think some of their moves that they made, just mainly in bringing in Ryan Grubb, kind of solidifying some question mark positions there, that's going to be huge for Alabama. I think that they could definitely make the playoff again this year, and I think we're going to see some improvement from this Alabama Crimson Tide team. Now, Ole Miss. So everybody pretty much knows Ole Miss sold out on the 2024 season. They went all in, pushed all their chips towards that table. And they did. I think they had one of the best rosters in college football last year in terms of talent. I think it was a top 2 or 3 roster, but just self-inflicted wounds last year. That Kentucky loss was just brutal at home. Losing on the road at Florida in a game where if they won that, they're probably in the college football playoff after they have state the next week. But they're losing a lot here. You lose Dart. You lose Trey Harris. You lose Princely Umanulea on the defense. Chris Paul on defense. Trey Amos. They have added, though, 20-plus rosters. So to kind of replace that wide receiver room of Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, who are all gone now. That was their top 3 wideouts. They bring in Oklahoma State wideout Deshaun Stribling, had about 900 receiving yards last year. Bring in Harrison Wallace from Penn State as well. Running backs, that's going to be an interesting one. They let Quinshawn go last year, left for Ohio State. Logan Diggs should kind of take over that role. I'm curious as to how Ole Miss is going to do this year. I think they're much more of a question mark than Alabama is. You have Austin Simmons replacing Jackson Dart. Everything coming out of Oxford sounds like they love Austin Simmons. Lane Kiffin is super high on Austin Simmons, thinks he can be a really great starter for them, and I agree with that. I think this is one of the smartest quarterbacks in college football. The kid graduated this year, and I think he's still 19 years old. He enrolled at Ole Miss at 17 years old. So a kid that is really high IQ quarterback and super talented too. I think he's going to be interesting to watch. This is going to be a team, though, that I'm not sure if they get back to those heights of last season, at least this year. I think it might be more of a rebuilding, kind of retooling year for the Rebels. And then South Carolina. That was that last other kind of SEC team on the bubble, right? South Carolina, now their big thing here is retaining guys. They retain quarterback LaNorris Sellers. That's the biggest thing here. You have LaNorris Sellers, potential Heisman candidate at quarterback. Super exciting QB to watch in terms of dual threat ability. Can run, has got a cannon of an arm, and really completed more passes than we thought last year. His completion percentage was really solid. They have a really great outlook coming back in. They finished the season last year on a 6-game winning streak. They were playing with a lot of confidence towards the end of the season. And then they bring in some transfers on defense, and Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, Sean Murphy, and just some of those guys. Brandon Sisse, cornerback out of North Carolina State, coming in, should maybe start at some of those positions of question. They still bring back Dylan Stewart, freshman phenom defensive end, a kid that really kind of showcased his talent last year. I'm looking for him to step into a bigger role. I think that South Carolina is going to be a really interesting team this year, but they do have another difficult schedule this season. You got to go play at Missouri, at LSU, at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M. I think they might split those 4 road games, and then you still have Oklahoma, Alabama at home, Vanderbilt, Kentucky. Vanderbilt is really going to be a team that I think could be better than people think, bringing back Diego Pavia. So South Carolina is going to have some challenging games this year. And you still have the rivalry game with Clemson. They also open the season with Virginia Tech in Atlanta. So throughout the entire year, this is going to be a really tough run for South Carolina. I'm high on them, but I could certainly see them maybe faltering in some of these games where it might be more of a toss-up. I think probably a 9-3 type year is realistic, again, for South Carolina. I don't know if they get over the hump this year. I think it's going to be really close. I think it comes down to, can they win some of those tough road matchups, and then can they just stay at home, win at home, right? If you beat those, if you go 3-1 at least in those home games in the SEC, in Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Alabama, I think they have a shot to win around 9 games. I don't know if they get over the hump, though, again, this upcoming season. That's going to be something to watch. That's going to be a big storyline throughout this year is, can South Carolina keep that momentum from last season after ending on that big winning streak? Can they roll that into 2025 and keep that momentum going? And that's going to be a huge, huge question mark for the SEC, for South Carolina this upcoming season. So now we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more college football playoff, but we're going to go up north, talk about Indiana, Illinois, 2 teams that I think are pretty similar. Going to get into who might be a little more likely to make the playoff. But we're going to discuss that when we come back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.